All right, so we've already covered this slide, but I wanted you to have it because we missed this slide earlier. So we talked about food webs, energy flow, competition, density-dependent factors, density-independent factors. Today's topic is about succession. The word succession means something that comes after something else. So the change in ecosystems over time is called succession. Community change is readily observable. In this case, you see a lake that fills up with sediment. Plants grow on the bottom of the lake. Eventually, it becomes a marsh. Eventually, it becomes a forest because it filled in. That's succession. This is a picture of an island forming from a volcanic eruption. That island eventually will have an ecosystem on it, even though it's just bare rock at the moment in the picture. So bare rock starts with what we call primary succession. The word primary means first. If there's no soil, it's primary succession. Primary succession would also happen if the school was abandoned and the parking lot went through succession. There's no soil on top. So primary succession is any place where there is no soil. So if a landslide cleans everything away down to bare rock from the side of a mountain, primary succession would happen. A new island, primary succession. A parking lot, primary succession. Everything else is going to be called secondary, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So the first species to show up are called pioneer species. We know that the word pioneer means the first to show up. They break down the rock-forming soil. These are things like lichens and moss and very small plants that can crack rocks. Freeze-thaw cycle also makes soil, and eventually we get soil. And then the decaying pioneers provide organic material for that soil, and then the biogeochemical cycles start to circulate within the ecosystem, and eventually you get plants and then heterotrophs that can eat those plants, and eventually we get to what's called a climax community. The climax community is fairly stable. That doesn't mean it stays unchanged. The word climax means the high point, and so this is the community that is the most diverse with the most biodiversity, the most sustainable life in the ecosystem is called the climax community. So here we see a picture of Surtsey today, and you can see that there's some green on the far edge of the island. And so secondary succession happens when an ecosystem is disturbed. So for example, there's a forest, fire comes along, burns it down to the soil. So that's why it's secondary. There's already soil there. And the succession process happens again, and the ecosystem is somewhat restored. And so this happens when a tree falls down in the forest, when a hurricane comes through and washes away some plants or whatever down to the soil, and it starts again, or a bulldozer scrapes away some plants and secondary succession takes over when a field is no longer maintained and a forest replaces it, a lawn is not mowed anymore. These are examples of secondary succession. And so this is a picture from Perry County. On the left side, you can see that many of the trees were cut. The ground is much more bare. And this is secondary succession. There's a close-up of various stages of secondary succession, field transition to a forest. And you can see there's actually 4 different ecosystems in that picture. There's the grass in front that's maintained by mowing, and then there's the tall, weedy area, and then there's the brushy area, and then there's the forest in the back. And so that's succession in a nutshell, change over time. I'm looking forward to seeing your project